catch those of you who weren't here last week up to speed, and I'll let this reboot and we'll see if it's going to work. I had sabbatical. The church blesses each of our pastoral staff with a sabbatical every 5 years. And so I had wanted to do this walk for 20 years, and this was the first time I've been able to do it. Probably when I thought about this 20 years ago, I would have been much better shape to actually do it than I was this time. But there we go. All right. So so what the walk is a spiritual pilgrimage that is historically connected to some relics. And so traditionally, the bones of St. James are buried in Santiago. As I said last week, that is traditionally, not scripturally. And so, trying to do two things at once, and that doesn't work well. And so what happened in the 800s, the King of Spain wanted to go see these bones. And where he was at the time, it was in a city called Oviedo, and that is on the northern side of the country. So, I shared this last week, but Oviedo is here and Santiago is here. And it looks like that's probably about a 15 or 20 minute walk. But it's 220 miles. And so there are different routes that you can get to Santiago from that are considered official Camino de Santiago routes. One starts up here in Spain and comes across, in France, it comes across. A couple come from more interior and south. But the reason I chose this one is this is where King Alfonso was in 800s and made this trip. And so it's called the Primitivo. Now it's also, and this is going to lead into kind of what I want us to think about tonight in the way we trust God, it's also not as popular. So it's fewer people, fewer resources along the way, fewer places to stay, fewer restaurants. Part of that is it is more strenuous than the rest of them. It's more mountainous, and especially at the beginning. But what that led to was a lot of solitude, a lot of time to be alone with God and my thoughts and my huffing and puffing. So that was what I did. And for 13 days, I carried everything I needed in this backpack and walked between 15 and 18 miles a day on average. The goal was to leave about 7 in the morning, get to where you're going by 2:30 or so that you can actually eat. I shared last week that meal times there are different than here, and so if you want to eat, you better be where you're going by 4, or you're waiting until 9 at night to eat. And so the first day didn't go so well for me, and I got to the place I was going after 4 and was told they didn't have a room for me, and I won't go through that whole story again, but through that God provided. I found a place 3 miles further on and was able to get there before dark and had a place to sleep. But as I said, the walk really provided some solitude and some alone time with God. I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't listen to music or those kind of things. I just walked. The only exception was each morning I would put my AirPods in and listen to a prayer podcast for 20 minutes that I listen to here every day as well. But other than that, it was just me and nature and God. And so it allows for time to be alone with God. And I want to start there tonight to really have us think about that for a minute. Have you ever spent extended time alone with God where there was no other option? It's very formative. There's no place to hide. There's no place to distract yourself. It's just you and God. And so there were times it was uncomfortable. And you may be thinking, well, you're a pastor, you're supposed to spend time with God every week. Well, that's true. But usually it's in between this phone call and this email and this person dropping by. And so when you're alone for 7 or 8 hours each day, walking, just trying to survive, in my case, it gives you a lot of time to be alone with God and a lot of silence. And I don't know if you spend a lot of time in silence, because silence is hard to come by in our culture, in our world. We always have some kind of noise going. There's always distraction. There's always something to occupy at least a portion of our mind. I ran across a quote from Dallas Willard. He says, "Silence is frightening because it strips us as nothing else does, throwing us upon the stark realities of our life. And in that quiet, what if there turns out to be very little to just us and God?" That's why I say you can't hide. So that it is a little anxious to leave and say, well, God, it's just you and me. What are we going to talk about today? But when it's just you and God, there's just time to really talk and listen. One of the things that I shared this past Sunday in the sermon is loving God looks like spending time with Him and listening and learning His voice and learning how His heart works and what He's passionate about. And so it was a wonderful, meaningful time for me to do that. The other thing that I shared last week, and I'll just say again, and I've already said, everything I needed for those 13 days was in that backpack. And so you learn that you don't need a lot of things because you're carrying whatever it is you take. And so you, even halfway through, I'm pulling stuff out going, hadn't used that yet, that's staying here. Hadn't seen a mosquito, I'm leaving the cortisone. You think, well, that's only 3 ounces. 3 ounces start adding up after a while. So you just start looking at that, and from a minimalist mindset that I really don't need all this stuff. But what that causes you to do is realize, how do I apply that to my spiritual walk? And I don't need a lot of things that I put in my life. In fact, a lot of things that we put in our lives become distractions from really spending time with God. And that's really, although it's not a Baptist practice, but you always hear me talk about it at the beginning of the Easter season when we talk about Lent. That's what Lent is really about. It's not necessarily about, and it's not the stuff in the dryer. That's a different kind of Lent. The season is the time that we typically think, well, when we give something up. But the idea there is, what have we put in our lives that really take away from our focus on God? And so this walk stripped everything down to where there weren't a lot of distractions. And I had a wonderful time to spend with Him. And as I said, carrying everything you need with you puts you in a different frame of mind in how you trust God. Do I need to pack 3 sandwiches, or do I just trust God? And I shared last week, to really trust God in the way that it was always done, you would walk and not have a place to stay. You would just trust that there would be a place when you got there. After my first day of nearly passing out and giving up, I decided I'm going to have a reservation, a place to stay when I get where I'm going, so I don't have to worry about that. And so this whole thing just illustrated how God is there to take care of us, that when we strip everything down, really all we need, and you've heard me say this over and over again since I've been back, but when you strip everything down, all we really need is our relationship with Jesus. That's really all that we need. We put a lot of other things with that, but when we really take it all away, all that we really need is Him. So, some lessons I learned along the way about trust is, I'll go back and just briefly share that first day. I thought I had a place to stay. About an hour before I got to Grado, which was the town I was going to be staying in, at the albergue there, the hostel, I ran out of water. And so for the last hour, I'm in my mind thinking, I'm gonna die. No, I really wasn't, but it was a struggle. And so I come into town, it's hot, I'm thirsty. I make it to this albergue and I walk in and the lady says, we're full. And I said, but I have a reservation. And she said, we're full. And so I walked across the street, sat down in my sad little self and thought, well, what am I gonna do? And I got my phone out and I got my little book out and I thought, I'll just call one of these others. Well, then I realized my phone wouldn't work. I could call the United States, but I couldn't call other numbers in Spain. So that took about 3 hours to get that fixed. And then when I finally got through to Hospitalero, they're called, the gentleman who ran the albergue, I'm trying to talk to him in Spanish and tell him I need a room, do you have a room? And we're talking back and forth, and I think we're communicating okay, but he finally says, un momento, and he hands the phone to somebody who can speak English. I thought, well, that's good. God's taking care of me there. Hang on to that, remind me, because that point's going to come back in a minute. So they basically say, well, we just came to Grotto, we picked up 6 people, but there's no more room in the car. But if you can get to this next place, then you'll have a bed. So I said, that's fine, and I started walking. When I got there, the hospitalero is named Domingo, and he wanted to make sure I had something to eat. And so I said, I'm good. I had a can of Pringles and a Diet Coke. Everything's fine. But he would not have that, so he made sure that I ate some soup about 9:30 that night and made sure I knew where my bed was and everything was taken care of. And I was reminded that in all of that, as I reflected on it the next day as I walked, I realized none of that surprised God. And what I felt like God was teaching me is, why don't you trust me? I have you. I have you. You're going to have to let go, but trust me. As I was walking the next day, the reason this lesson kind of came to life for me is as I was walking the next day, typically I walked alone, primarily because I was out of shape and everybody walked faster than me. And if you were here last week, you know the first few days I was carrying way too much water and way too much weight, and I was able to figure that out along the way and lighten the load a little bit. But I did come upon a young couple from Norway, and they spoke English, and so as we walked, we talked a little bit, and where are you from, why are you on the Camino, that whole thing that we talked about last week. And she is her name's Mari, and she is a botanist and works, very young, probably maybe not even 30, but works in a lab to grow plants without soil. And so then they're marketing that to countries that need food but don't have a way to grow it. And so it was just interesting talking to her. But in the course of the conversation, she said, well, where did you start? And I said, well, I started in Oviedo, and I was supposed to stay in Grotto last night, but when I got there wasn't a place. And so I was able to call and stay. And she goes, that was you. And I said, what do you mean? She said, when Domingo handed the phone to someone who could speak in English, that was me. And I thought of all the people on this walk in another country, and that to me was God's way of saying, see, I'm taking care of you. Why don't you just, how about letting go and just letting me take care of this? And it was just, again, a gentle reminder, but just one of those ways that God says, trust me. I shared this passage since I've been back, but let me just share it again. Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth. And you may remember when I referenced that passage in the sermon a few weeks ago, I talked about this idea of what it means to be still. The better translation is relax and let go. That's the literal translation of the Hebrew word, relax and let go. I memorized it, be still and know that I'm God. But the literal translation is relax and let go and know that I'm God. And that was a great reminder for me to know that part of trusting God is just letting him be God and be reminded that I am not. God always gives us direction. That was another lesson. And I talked a little bit about this last week, and I showed you some pictures. I've got a couple more. But along the way, in order to know how to get to where you're going, well, let me back up. As I said a moment ago, really this Camino experience is a metaphor for our walk with Jesus each and every day. And for me, the way I think that is true for me is every morning I knew that my goal, long term as in within the week I was there, week and a half I was there, my goal was to get to Santiago. That was the goal. I couldn't see Santiago from Grotto or Oviedo or even Lugo. In fact, you don't see Santiago until you get to the Monte de Gozo, which I showed you that picture last week. But I knew that was the goal. But what I knew I had to do for the day was get up and walk in that direction and pay attention along the way for the signs to know when to turn and when not to turn, which way to go. And then trust God to show me those signs. Our spiritual life is the same thing. We don't know what 5 years from now will bring. In fact, you may remember I shared from the pulpit, and I shared last week, one of my goals for this experience was to go away to really spend time with God so that he would show me what the next 5-10 years of my ministry looks like. What is it that you expect from me? What is it that you want me to do? That didn't happen. I didn't come back with a scroll of vellum that I can say, okay, week 1, this is what I'm doing. Y'all know me, you know that's what I would want, because I'm a planner, but that didn't happen. But what he did do along the way was remind me that just do what you know to do, and I'll direct your path if you'll let me. If you'll pay attention and let me. So along the way, you see all kinds of different trails. This was one through the countryside, very overgrown. You can't see them in this picture, but just a little further on, there were blackberries everywhere. And I grew up in West Texas, where the only thing that would grow were mesquite bushes, not trees, bushes. I didn't know mesquites grew into trees until I went to college, because I moved to Abilene, and I was like, whoa, what's that? Because they never got over this tall, but they were just bushes and thorns. But if you don't know this, blackberries have thorns. I didn't know this.
You do now.
I do now. In fact, at one point, I was stopped on the side of the trail trying to get the blood to stop when somebody else walked up and said, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, just a scratch, but man." Because the blackberries would just overhang the trail, and if you weren't paying attention and you walked through them, they would just grab you. That's a side note. So some trails were like this. Some were, you don't have a lot of choice. You're going down this trail. You go off that way, it's not going to end well. So, follow the trail. Some were along the side of a highway, like we talked last week. I mean, this one actually had a secure area to walk, but there were places where I was walking on the white line hoping the cars would slow down enough to not hit me. So you had those kind of trails as well. And then some were, again, back in the wilderness with don't step off the wrong way or you're going to end up in the water. And then some were like this. I could go this way, or this way, or this way. Which way do I go? And, you think, well, just try one. And when you're walking for 15 miles and you're carrying everything you need on your back, you don't want to make the wrong turn. I shared last week, for those who weren't here, one day I had to leave the actual route and go a couple of blocks over to the place I was staying. Well, the next morning, I wasn't paying attention, obviously, and so I headed out the direction I thought I was supposed to go, and I didn't see any arrows or any markers for a little while. And I just started praying, God, I hope I'm going the right way, because if I'm not, I could end up in France or somewhere else. Show me a sign. And about that time, there was literally a sign on a post about the size of this picture that said in Spanish, "Pilgrim, if you've come this way, you've gone the wrong way." And I said, thank you, God. So I turned around and went 3 or 4 blocks back and found the arrow and got back on the path and made it. But, we in our spiritual pilgrimage there, we come to those places, which is the right way. On the pilgrimage, on the Camino, there are different things that you look for. The shell, as I shared last week, has become symbolic of the Camino. So you'll see those in different places, and I'll show you some examples. And then a yellow arrow. And so you are always looking for that. So like I said, the goal is to get out and start walking in the direction you know to go, and then keep watching for these signs along the way to make sure that you're still on the right path. Our spiritual pilgrimage is like that. Some of them are a little less obvious. This one was just left over from something that was just laying there, cast in stone. Some, and you've got to look really close, but this is a building in town, and I don't know if you can see it now maybe. You had to be looking for these things. If you've ever driven in Mexico, you probably know this, in other countries too, but Mexico in particular, the road signs aren't on the street, they're on the corner of the building, if there's one at all. And so if you want to know what street you're on, you better be looking at the buildings to look for a sign, and not all of them have it, but some do. So it was kind of like that in this case. So I'll get that to go back the way it was. A lot of these markers were everywhere, and so this was the best thing you could look for, because they were easy to spot, and that would tell you which way to go. Typically, the shell, the base of the shell is pointing you in the direction you need to go, but not always. Sometimes they got confused. So again, you're still trying to figure out which way to go, but I always went with the arrow instead of the shell. So, but if the shell was, just go around in a circle. That's what it is. You're just supposed to go around. Keep the picture of that marker in your mind. Well, you can't see that, but that was me on day 4 or so, with holes in my sock and holes in my shoe. Well, I'll just leave it at this marker. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." And that passage kept coming to my mind as well. I wanted to know where I was going, but the passage kept coming back. Don't trust in your own understanding, lean on him. And again, same thing in our spiritual pilgrimage. We want to know, we want clarity, we want direction, and sometimes God says, just trust me. Just trust me. I started a book last week, and really, to be honest, what drew me to the book, and I'm glad I have it, and I found it very meaningful to this point, but really what drew me to the book was the title. The title of the book is "Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools." Have you heard of the book?
I read it. I told you about it.
Oh, you did?
Tyler Staton.
Yeah, I've got his other book.
Yeah,
and so,
Stranger. I read that one too.
Okay, all right. So in this book, I ran across a couple of quotes that I felt that were relevant to tonight. He said, "Before we can have faith that God will answer a given request, we simply have to learn to trust the character of the God we're talking to." That's at the base level of trusting God, is really believing, and you hear me say this a lot, but do we really believe that God is who he says he is and that he'll do what he says he'll do? Another quote that he gave us, which is, again, kind of was hit me between the eyes. He said, "You and I have been groomed by a post-enlightenment story of deconstruction that doesn't trust God anymore, but has plenty of reasons not to trust people either. The result is multiple generations of people who find safety in pretending they don't need either one. I can trust myself, guide myself, be enough for myself." That's what we've grown up in. That's our culture. But when you really lay it all out there, you can't trust yourself. You can't be enough. You can't guide yourself. But what Jesus taught us is that we can trust God. Jesus showed us the God that we can trust. And so we just have to have faith in that. So not only can we trust God, how did I say that before? With who we are and where we're headed. We can trust him to give us directions. We can also trust our burdens to him. This pack is my symbol of carrying things. But what is it that you carry that you don't need to be carrying? What burdens are distracting you and keeping you from really trusting in God? The reason I left this picture up here, and you don't see any on this one, you see a few around the base, but one of the things that was very common was people would pick up rocks along the way to symbolize a burden or a prayer request or something that they were carrying. And at some point in the journey, the idea was to lay that on one of these markers and walk away and leave it in God's hands. And so you would see these markers along the way, and a lot of times there would be rocks on there. I don't have the picture loaded. I'll try to remember to load it next week. I think I mentioned to y'all that the young man from Madrid last week named Oscar. Oscar was a social butterfly. Everybody on the walk knew Oscar, and Oscar knew everybody. Oscar made it to Santiago 2 days before I did. The reason I bring up Oscar is he carried a rock like this from Oviedo all the way to Madrid, or all the way to Santiago. And he never would tell me what that burden was, but he said, "I'm carrying this until I can feel good about laying it down." He would be one that would say he wasn't on the pilgrimage for a spiritual reason, but I think he was. He just didn't know it. So the reason that I left this up here is that reminder, and there was a lesson in that for me. I had a couple of things that one of which, like I said, was, God, show me what you want for me for the next 10 years, the next 5 years. But there were other things that I was carrying and praying for along the way. And I picked up a rock about day 2, carried that for a few days and prayed over this particular person, and came to a point one morning. I said, "Okay, this is it. God, I can't do any more. This person is yours." And I laid that rock on top of that marker in tears, and I stepped back and I said, "Jesus, this person's yours. I wish I could do more. If I'm supposed to do more, show me, tell me. But I know I'm supposed to give this person to you." And what I heard in that moment as a response from Jesus was, pray for them, love them, and trust me with the rest. Pray for them, love them, and trust me with the rest. That was free for me. Did I really walk away and leave that there? Not fully. And I'll share in a moment how it came back. But that was what I felt God saying to me in that moment, is your role is to pray for them and to love them well, and then trust me with the rest of it. That's hard to do. If you've lived that, if you have someone in your life that you think, I gotta fix that person. We need to remember that we're not in the fixing business. As much as we would want to be, we're really not in the fixing business. And so for me, that was very a meaningful moment for me to hear those, not audibly, but to hear those words, just pray for them and love them well, and then just trust me with the rest. Even when we don't understand or see much hope, we can trust the God who does. And so this pilgrimage has helped me remember that. It's not that I didn't know it, we all need those reminders from time to time. Isaiah 26:3-4 say, "You will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord is the rock eternal." That's who we serve. He's fully trustworthy. We just have to let go and trust. Another lesson along the lines of trusting is that God meets us where we are. We don't have to hide anything from God. God knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows our hearts, and we simply need to trust Him. And trust that He loves us and wants what is best for us. I know that's easy to say, and when living completely stripped down to the bare necessities, it's really hard to do. It's hard to trust God in those moments. We don't have a choice, but it's still hard to think, okay, I don't know where my next meal's coming from, God. I'm trusting that you're going to provide, and if you don't, I needed to lose a little weight anyway. That's really what it comes down to, is trusting God, but knowing that He knows already, and He meets us where we are. Matthew 7, verses 7-11 say, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds. And to him who knocks the door will be opened." Then He says this, "Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you, then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask Him?" We just have to believe that and trust that God really is who He says He is. This may not mean a whole lot to you, and you may be thinking as I share this story with you, how did He get this out of that? But on the last day of the walk, I was walking into Santiago. I had tried to schedule it to where it was a half-day walk instead of a 7-hour walk, so that I could be there by noon. Because at noon, I'll show you a video in a later study, but at noon, and I don't even know what they call this thing. Who in here is familiar with the Catholic tradition and the incense that they swing?
Bufano.
What is it?
It's called a bufano, where they
Bufano.
so they release it over the pilgrim's mass.
Yes. So the pilgrims, they do about 4 masses at the cathedral in Santiago throughout every day, but only the one at noon do they release the
incense.
Bufago.
Yeah, it's a big incense carrier, and it swings out over
So
the
this
church.
thing, you've seen pictures, or maybe you've been in a Catholic mass where and it's like this big and it, smokes. This thing is the size of that table and about this tall. And it takes about 7 or 8 priests with a pulley system to pull on a rope to swing this thing across. If you get hit with that, you're dead. But I wanted to see that. And so I knew if I didn't make it by noon, I wouldn't get to see that. And so I scheduled my day to where or scheduled the day before so that I would walk a little farther, so that I knew the next morning I could make it by noon. And like I said, I've got a video of that's the only time in the service in the cathedral that they'll allow you to use your phone. But I was back there videoing it, and not great quality, but got it nonetheless. And so I'm on my walk, and I'm about halfway to Santiago. And I shared last week, along the way, to prove that you made the walk, you're supposed to get what are called celos. And they're stamps, and you're supposed to have 2 a day. And so on that last day, I stopped at a church, and I guess it would be that stamp right there. But anyway, that's why I stopped at the church. I went in, and there was a young lady there, and she stamped my card, and I thought, well, I'm just going to take a look in the room, see what it looks like. Most of the churches were locked, as I told you last week, along the way, and so this one was open. And so I went in, and I saw a young lady up front lighting a candle, and so she was praying, and kind of looked around, and I thought, well, this is pretty. And then I headed back out to get my pack and get back on the trail so that I could make it on to Santiago in time. But something about, in that moment, I just felt compelled to stop and sit down for a minute and just pray. And I don't know why. To this day, I don't really know why, because I had been in a couple other churches and didn't necessarily feel compelled to pray like I did this particular day. Maybe it was because it was the last day and I was about to walk into Santiago. I don't know, but for whatever reason, I felt compelled to just sit down and pray. Maybe it's I needed to rest, I don't know. But I began to pray, and as I did, that rock that I had laid on a marker came back to my mind, and I began to pray for that person again, to the point that I began to sob. And at one point I opened my eyes, and there was a pool at my feet. And I thought, well, nobody knows. I'm just sitting here bowed over praying. And I felt somebody touch me on the shoulder. And I turned, and it was the young lady that had been praying up in the front of the church, and she handed me the tissue, and she walked out. And that may not mean anything to you, and you may not see, I don't know that I even see the jump. But in that moment, that was God telling me, I'm still with you, and I still have it. You can trust me. And so I was there another 10 minutes or so composing myself after that. But that made a huge impact on me, to know that even in the midst of that deep moment I was having in lifting up this person to God, and really sorrowful about how this is gone, and all of those things. And in the middle of that young lady being led to hand me a tissue, I was like, at that point, the male macho thing goes away, and you're just grateful. You're just grateful that God is paying attention, that God is listening. And so, throughout the 13 days, God showed me a lot of different things. Again, as I shared last week, I went and my prayer was, show me what the next 5 years looks like. God didn't really do that. But what he did do is remind me that he is with me and that I can trust him. And there's some other lessons I learned, which will be subjects for future meetings that we'll talk about as we keep going. Next week we won't meet. Just be reminded of that. Next week is fall break, and so we won't meet. So the following week we'll be back. And the subject that night, at this point in my notes, is doesn't take much. All we really need is Jesus. And so I'll share some pictures there and think about some lessons learned along those lines as well. But in bringing this, and one of the things I shared last week, and really what I envision for our time together, is not just a show and tell, hey, let's go watch Brian's slideshow. I've had several say, well, show more pictures, and I have more, and we'll show more, but I really want this to be a time that we can also make application to our own journey and our own pilgrimage and walking with Jesus each and every day. And so, a couple of questions I want you thinking about tonight and moving forward. I think I need to probably type these up and give them to you each week, right? I'll do that next time. But for tonight, have you found that you can truly trust God with your very life? Have you ever been in a position where you really had to trust Him with your very life? Most of us haven't. I hadn't. Not like that. And if so, what did that do for your spiritual walk? To really have to come to terms with, I literally have to trust God with my very life. And to know that He is trustworthy. I'm looking at a few of you around the room that you have had to live that recently. How has God shaped you through that? How has God grown you through that? Another thought that I want you to think about, meditate on, is what have you put into your life that you trust in place of God? And we may not even realize it, but when you're in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a little backpack and a couple of changes of clothes and a little bit of water, you realize there's a lot of things I've put in my life that I really don't need, that really can become more distractive than helpful. So what have you put into your life that you trust in place of God? One of the things that all of us have lived through in the last 5 years is COVID-19 reminded us that a lot of things we thought we could count on, that we could trust, we really can't. I don't know if you learned that lesson or not through that experience, but that was a very powerful lesson to learn. Is there were a lot of things that we had grown to expect and count on that we realized in the middle of that we couldn't. Third thing is, do you know that God will provide what you need? Do you really know that? We can say that intellectually. Oh, God will provide. But do we really know that? Do we really believe that? Do we really trust that? And then the last one I want you to think about is, how will you set out each morning fully trusting God with your day? What will you do? How will you trust Him tomorrow? When you get up in the morning, what will your prayer be to really make sure that you trust God with every part of tomorrow? As I shared last week, one of my things in my journal that I wrote before I came back was, God, help me not fall back in the rut I was in before. I don't know that I shared this with y'all last week, but did I share about the headline of my life? Did I share about that last week?
No.
So before I left, I looked at the previous 3 to 4 months, and I came up with a headline that would depict my life for that 3 months. And my headline was, something's got to give. And about day 8 of the Camino, my headline changed. And it was, slow down and simplify. Slow down and simplify. I've been around the sun 60 times now, and can't do all that I used to do, or at least my mind hasn't really registered that yet, but I know it to be true. So slow down and simplify. And so one of the things I was worried about or anxious about coming back is, how do I not get right back into the rut that I was in, of going. Obviously today was one of those illustrations that I haven't done well, because I ran in here at 6:34 and even then wasn't prepared, because I had a meeting at 5:30 and a meeting at 6. Just put too much in. But each day we need to think about, how will we trust God with the day, with every part of the day? So think on those things. I'll read them again. Have you found that you can truly trust God with your very life? What have you put into your life that you trust in place of God? Do you know that God will provide what you need? And how will you set out each morning fully trusting God with your day? Reflect on those things between now and next week. And if something comes to mind, jot that down, share it with the group next week. If you didn't sign in, if you would, that would be great, and I will get that turned into the office, and then they can put it into the system, and then next week I can just check it off on my phone. So I'll do just like I did last week. Any thoughts, reflections, questions? Some of you weren't here last week, so maybe you have a question.
Don't you end tonight just like you ended last week?
Say that again.
End tonight like you ended last week, that one thing that you learned.
You're going to have to be more clear than that because I don't remember how I ended last week.
It was thought-provoking.
Y'all remember what he said last week at the very end?
I'll watch the video and see. I don't remember either.
Because it was what you basically learned.
Okay.
One thing you learned or something.
It was,
I'll look.
I thought maybe you just finish every week with.
Well, I probably need to now.
You're not thinking when he said, God eventually told him, I'm your child, and that's enough?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Oh.
exactly right.
Okay.
That's John, that's amazing.
Well, once in a while,
Yes, yes.
You were good.
So, okay. All right, I'll end that way.
Yes.
Any other thoughts, questions, suggestions?
You know, something you said, Brother Brian, and I mean, the minute you said it, the verse Jesus wept came to mind. And yeah, you know, when you were in the church praying for what you laid down, Jesus wept came to mind.
Yeah. I certainly was.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, shows his, in that instance, shows his compassion. Does not show his inability to change the situation. It shows his compassion for those that were affected, because we know he then went and raised Lazarus. But it shows that he has a compassion for us. All right, well then I will thank you, John, for refreshing our memory. So again, every morning I would pray as I began to walk, and typically every morning the prayer was something to the effect, Lord Jesus, draw me to yourself, draw me closer and speak to me. Show me what you want for me to do with my life, with my ministry. And on one particular morning, it was very clear, again, not audible, but nonetheless as clear as me looking at you right now, that Jesus said to me, you're my child and I love you. Let that be enough for now. That's very liberating. When your life is built around, and I don't mean performing in the sense of an actor, but in being productive, in performing. When your life is built around that, having Jesus say, you're my child, that's really all that matters, that's enough. So be reminded of that tonight. You're his child, and he loves you. Let that be enough. Thank you. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I thank you for the way that you do walk with us each and every day. And I ask, Lord, as we go through this study together, that it is that. It is not just me talking about an experience that I had, but Father, that we can see the parallel between this pilgrimage, this walk, and our daily walk with you. Remind us that we know the end that we are walking towards, and that is to be in heaven with you. And Lord, along the way, our desire is to please you and to walk with you. And when that desire begins to wane, Lord, we ask that you would renew that desire in us, so that each morning we get up and we just walk in the direction we know to go, to do the things we know to do, and then give us discernment to see those places where you redirect our path, where you point us in a new direction, and help us to be sensitive to that and ready to move with you. So often we can get out ahead of you, or more often than that, fall behind and drag our feet. But I pray that you would help us to walk in step with you. Help us to trust you more each and every day. Help us to love you more deeply each and every day, and serve you more faithfully each and every day. not for our glory, but for yours. In Jesus' name we pray it. Amen.